The first sign was not light, nor thunder, nor the triumphant blare of forgotten trumpets, but breath-thin, ancient, and impossibly tired, and I remember thinking, in that single forbidden instant, that the Golden Throne had learned how to suffer aloud. For 10 millennia I have stood within the Sanctum Imperialis, robed in red and oath-bound flesh, my life reduced to ritual, observation, and the slow erosion of hope, and never once had the throne sounded like a living thing until that moment, when the air behind my eyes trembled and the Astronomicon faltered as if the galaxy itself had flinched. I did not turn, I was not permitted to, but every cell in my body knew something had changed, because the pressure inside my skull, the constant divine weight of his presence shifted from an eternal scream into something quieter and infinitely worse. Awareness. Understand this: those who imagine the Emperor as a sleeping god are wrong, because sleep implies rest, and there has been none here. Only unending vigilance stretched across time, so vast it has crushed every human concept of mercy into dust. The Golden Throne Chamber is not holy in the way pilgrims dream. It is a mausoleum wired with agony, a cathedral of failing machines and sacrificed souls, where incense masks the stench of ozone and burning synapses, and where the walls themselves are etched with prayers that have never been answered. Every day 1,000 psychers are fed into the throne, their minds flensed into fuel so the Emperor may remain what he has been forced to become. And I have watched their eyes go glassy, their mouths still forming hymns, long after their souls were consumed. Yet in all those years never once had the Emperor responded. Not with a word, not with a thought that could be separated from the endless psychic roar that sustains the Imperium until now. The breath came again, deeper this time, dragging across the warp like a blade through silk, and somewhere far beyond Terra, I felt navigators scream as their third eyes bled starlight, felt astropaths collapse mid-transmission as the Emperor's psychic gravity shifted, rewriting the rules of his own divinity. My training told me to record, to observe, to suppress emotion, but my heart did not listen, because I realized with sick clarity that gods are most dangerous, not when they rage, but when they awaken confused. The throne's mechanisms began to change, pitch, ancient systems reacting to a variable they were never designed to handle. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor's presence was not static, it was searching. Memories flooded the chamber like ghosts freed from a tomb. Olanor, the Great Crusade, Brotherhood and Betrayal, Horus. Fall, the burning of Istvan, the screaming void of the Eye of Terror, and I felt the weight of each memory pressed into my mind as if I were not a witness, but a confessor. Shadows writhed along the walls, cast not by light, but by psychic resonance. The servo-cranes and mechanized supports that held the throne trembled in synchronicity, a chorus of iron groaning at the touch of something older than the stars. I dared not breathe, yet the air was thick with whispers. The dead spoke to the living, and their voices twisted in my skull, half pain, half command, as though the throne itself hungered for an audience. A flicker of heat traced my spine, an unnatural warmth that made the air shimmer, because the Emperor, for the first time since his enthronement, moved, not physically, for his body remained bound in gold and steel, but his mind, immense and fractured, tested the boundaries of its cage. The aura of command rolled outwards, subtle at first like ripples across a psychic lake, yet strong enough to turn the blood of thousands to ice, to make the most disciplined Astartes falter mid-stride, and the servitors slumped as if their marrow had been drained by unseen hands. My soul felt like it had been peeled from my body and displayed for judgment. In that moment, I understood that the Emperor's awakening is not salvation, it is reckoning. I caught flashes of his vision. Humanity spread across a galaxy that has forgotten him, worlds rotting beneath bureaucratic rot, battles fought in his name without honor, psychers harvested and discarded, planets drowned in war, the Mechanicus whispering heresies as they rebuilt his relics for profit, and the hive cities festering under the weight of 10,000 sins. A rage unlike any human comprehension pulsed through the chamber, but it was tempered by infinite sorrow. Grief accumulated over millennia, and I saw in my mind the faces of the Primarchs he had loved, scattered, broken, or absent, and his heart, or what passes for such an abyss beyond life and death, ate with loneliness that the throne cannot alleviate. And then came the quietest sound of all, a single thought, deliberate and heavy, pressing into my consciousness. What have they done? I fell to my knees, not in prayer, but in terror, because I realized that the Emperor of mankind, the architect of humanity's dominion, had begun to remember Philinod selectively, not like a god checking records, but with all the rage, love, betrayal, and pain that he had carried through the Great Crusade, through the heresy, and through 10,000 years of psychic crucifixion. The chamber shuddered, the throne's golden veins glowing with the light of 100 billion tormented souls. And I saw something impossible. The machinery, the wards, the sacrificial systems all reacting, rewiring, adjusting, as if the throne itself feared his comprehension. And in that realization, I understood the truth that none of the High Lords of Terra have ever admitted aloud. The Emperor is not a stabilizer of humanity. He is its ultimate weapon, and if he wills it, the galaxy will burn not with chaos, not with Xenos, not even with rebellion, but with the full force of divine judgment, tempered only by the infinitesimal spark of mercy he chooses to keep. My limbs were frozen, my mind a whirlwind, yet I dared a glance at the golden figure before me, and in his eyes saw the void where eyes should have been. I saw the infinite expanse of time staring back, aware of every sin, every failure, every act of devotion and betrayal. And I understood why the Sisters of Silence have never approached without dread. To confront him awake is to confront every choice the Imperium has ever made, and every choice it will ever make. The chamber was no longer just a sanctum, it was a crucible, a test for any soul who dared witness the stirrings of a god who has been forced to wait and watch, imprisoned by flesh and machine. I heard the faint crackle of psychic energy slicing the air, the hum of machinery straining, the whispers of dead psychers rising in crescendo, as if the entire hive of souls bound to the throne recognized the moment as the first step toward reckoning. I realized then that this is the point where legends fail, where tales of salvation and eternal guidance collapse under the weight of reality. The Emperor's awakening is not the dawn of a new age, it is a mirror, and humanity may not survive looking into it. And as the chamber fell into a tense silence, broken only by the faint ragged breathing of the God Emperor, I felt my own mind begin to fracture under the psychic weight, and I understood, truly understood, the horror of knowing that the one being who could save the galaxy was about to decide whether it deserved salvation at all. And I, a single witness in a sea of 10,000 years of suffering, trembled in awe, terror, and an impossible hope that I did not feel I deserved. And in that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The moment his awareness expanded beyond the throne, the Imperium itself shuddered, subtle at first. A tremor in the warp that made navigators stagger in their bridges, astropaths howl with static that cut their minds like blades, and the psychic lattice of the Astronomicon falter as if the very light of terror had been dimmed by an unseen hand. I watched from the observation dais, red robes stiff with sweat, the golden glow of the throne pulsating like the heartbeat of a galaxy long starved. And I realized that the Emperor's first act in his half-wakefulness was not vengeance, not salvation, but observation, and it pierced me deeper than any bolt round, for his gaze is not literal, yet I felt it in every nerve, as if my thoughts themselves were laid bare to judgment. Worlds whispered their sins to him through the psychic currents, hive cities drowned in corruption, planetary governors scheming with chaos-tainted relics, Mechanicus lords twisting sacred machines into weapons of profit, and I felt the weight of 10,000 millennia pressing down, the cumulative guilt of billions of human choices condensed into a single unbearable scrutiny. I could hear the silent screams of the psychers still bound to the throne, their agony mingling with the psychic resonance of the Emperor's awakening, creating a soundless symphony of terror and awe that no human or otherwise could truly endure. And yet in that noiseless horror I found clarity, a terrible understanding that the God Emperor is a being whose mind is infinite, whose patience is eternal, and whose judgment once applied is absolute. Outside the throne room, the Imperial Palace itself seemed to respond. Servitors halted mid-cusk, plasma conduits flickered, and the enormous doors of the Sanctum Imperialis groaned, as if anticipating the impossible, while high above, the great dome of the palace reflected the golden radiance like a signal to the stars themselves, a warning that the architect of humanity had begun to stir and remember fully all that had been done in his name. I dared not close my eyes, yet visions came unbidden. I saw the Primarchs scattered across the galaxy, some dead, some missing, some dishonored. By the passage of time, their triumphs and failures compressed into a psychic panorama that made my mind reel. I felt Lorgar's whispered prayers, Horus, long-dead betrayal still echoing in the warp, and sanguineous sacrifice burning brighter than the sun in memory, and I knew that the Emperor was assembling these fragments of history like shards of a mirror, seeing the reflection of his Imperium not as it was, but as it had become. And then came the first test. A minor world, insignificant in the grand ledger of stars, flickered in the warp as the Emperor's presence brushed against it. Its inhabitants went about their mundane suffering, unaware that the god of that species had acknowledged them, and yet that acknowledgement carried weight heavier than a fleet of battleships crops withered. Machinery stalled, the psychic resonance of the planet thrummed with fear and awe, and I understood that every corner of the galaxy he touched would feel both the promise of salvation and the certainty of judgment. I could not breathe, yet I felt the pull of the throne drawing me inward toward understanding and terror simultaneously. My own mind split as I realized that to witness the Emperor awaken is to experience every possibility of hope and despair at once, a paradox that threatens sanity. The Adeptus Astartes deployed across the Sol system reported strange occurrences. Warriors frozen mid-stride, some weeping uncontrollably, others suddenly aware of sins they did not know they had committed. And I knew that this was no hallucination, no trick of the warp, but a psychic ripple that touched even the genetically engineered minds of angels of death. And the Custodes, normally immune to distraction or emotion, murmured among themselves of a presence they had never encountered, speaking in voices low with awe, for the Emperor was not simply awake. He was remembering, recalibrating, and understanding the vast tapestry of his Imperium with a precision that mocked human comprehension. I tried to focus, to catalogue the changes, but the more I observed, the more my mind rebelled. For the Emperor's awareness is not linear, it flows in spirals, in recursive feedback loops that fold past, present, and possible futures into a single overwhelming psychic experience, and I felt my own memories, my own fears, my own failures, pressed against me by the sheer force of his cognition. The psychic choir, normally a source of order and amplification for the throne, began to falter as their collective voices blended into the psychic roar, a chaotic resonance that made the air shimmer with light and shadow as if reality itself quivered under the weight of a thought too immense for creation. I thought of all the worlds that would feel this, the billions who would be unaware of the cosmic judgment inching toward them. And I understood, in a way that sickened me, that the Imperium is not merely a galaxy-spanning empire, it is a living confession, and the Emperor is its only jury. And in that moment of terror and revelation, I glimpsed what the heretic Astartes had always spoken of in whispers too fearful to utter aloud, that the Emperor, bound though he is, has not forgotten, has not forgiven, and that the galaxy's sins are counted individually in the ledger of his mind. I felt the psychic pressure in my skull peak, like the moment before a star dies. And yet, amid the crushing weight, came a sliver of clarity, an impossible hope, that perhaps he might show mercy, that perhaps he might act not as destroyer but as guide. But that hope was fleeting, a candle in a storm, for I knew all too well the paradox. The Emperor of mankind is bound to protect humanity, and yet he now knows fully what humanity has done in his absence. And so I stand here trembling, unable to move or speak, while the galaxy waits unknowingly for a god to finish waking. And I realize the inescapable truth that I, a lowly observer, am both witness and prey, for the Emperor's first act may be judgment, his second salvation, or his third annihilation, and none of it can be predicted, calculated, or avoided. The universe itself holds its breath, and I feel the pulse of the Golden Throne like a heartbeat in my chest, each thrum echoing with the weight of 10,000 years. Each vibration, a reminder that no empire built in his name can withstand the scrutiny of the one who truly understands it. And as I fall to my knees shaking, I know with absolute certainty that the galaxy will never be the same, that the Imperium teeters on the edge of awe and horror, and that humanity's fate rests on the mind of a god who has finally remembered all it has endured, all it has done, and all it has betrayed. By the time the first servitors convulsed and the machinery of the throne began to overheat, I realized with a sickening clarity that the Emperor's awakening was no longer confined to the Golden Throne. It was spilling outward like warp-tainted blood, insinuating itself into minds, hearts, and flesh. And I could feel the pulse in the walls, in the air, even in the steel bones of the palace itself, vibrating with a resonance that spoke of something older than humanity, older than the stars themselves. I moved through the chamber, though movement felt heavy as though reality itself resisted, and I saw the Custodes stand rigid, their golden halberds trembling in tiny increments, the silent recognition in their eyes of a force that even they could barely endure. They do not speak of it, but I could feel their fear. A disciplined terror honed over centuries, and I understood that this is not a mere mortal presence, but the very embodiment of judgment and sorrow, a mind so vast that it touches everything, it surveys yet so intimate that it pries into the smallest secret, the faintest thought, the tiniest lapse in loyalty. Outside the throne room, the air shimmered with psychic distortion, making the very light bend as if in pain. And in the sanctum's peripheral corridors, I could hear the soft, panicked cries of tech priests and acolytes. The sound amplified through the psychic resonance until it became a chorus of anguish, though their lips barely moved. I glimpsed a young psycho barely 16 standing frozen in the doorway, his eyes reflecting the golden glare of the throne. I could feel his fear as if it were my own, the way his mind strained under a weight he could not comprehend, and in that instant I understood that every human in the soul system demand, perhaps beyond, is being measured, weighed, considered, and that this measurement is absolute, unavoidable, and eternal. Somewhere in the upper levels of the palace, the voices of long-dead saints whispered through the machinery warnings, confessions, prayers, half-remembered and twisted by the psychic field. And I could not tell if they were coming from the Emperor or from the thousands of tortured psychers whose souls had long since been bound to the throne. And then came the tremor, a subtle shiver of metal, barely perceptible, yet it reverberated through my spine, and I realized the throne itself was responding to the Emperor's intent systems, self-repairing energy conduits, rerouting themselves sacrificial bindings, pulsing with a light that was both holy and terrifying, a light that promised salvation but demanded terror in return. My mind recoiled at the thought, for the Emperor is aware of all of this, and yet he is not yet fully awake. His awareness is like a star just beginning to flare, unpredictable, unstoppable, consuming all that surrounds it. I remembered the tales of the Horus Heresy, the Great Crusade, the betrayals and sacrifices, and I realized that these stories were mere shadows of what truly transpired, for the Emperor's mind holds everything, and his awakening brings the past, present, and possible futures crashing into one psychic crescendo. I felt my own memories invade me, the failures, the doubts, the moments I had hidden even from myself, exposed by the subtle push of his awareness, and I understood why the Sisters of Silence exist. To touch a mind unprepared for the Emperor is to risk shattering it utterly. As the day wore on, the throne began to hum, a vibration that penetrated the stone, the steel, and the flesh, as if the very galaxy were acknowledging a god's first stirrings after a slumber of 10,000 years. Servitors dropped tools, their neural pathways fried by the psychic backlash, and I could hear the faint screaming of distant battlefields where Imperial commanders suddenly knew, without explanation, that their actions were being judged. Entire campaigns paused mid-stride, fleets hesitated in war, and on isolated worlds, small populations felt an inexplicable coldness, a void in their hearts, as though something ancient and terrible had decided to watch them. I caught glimpses of the Primarchs in my visions, some dead, some lost, some still wandering the stars, and the Emperor's mind seemed to reach toward them, brushing against their remnants like fingers over a harp, and I felt their presence through me, an echoing chorus of loyalty, betrayal, and grief that threatened to overwhelm my sanity. The machinery of the throne began to shift subtly, wires writhing golden conduits bending in impossible ways, and I realized that the Emperor's mind was already rewriting the systems built to contain him, bending the very constructs of his prison to fit the contours of his awakening thought. And through it all, I remained a witness, powerless yet utterly exposed, feeling the weight of 10,000 years of human sins pressing against my mind, and in that unbearable clarity, I understood the truth that no mortal may speak aloud. The Emperor of mankind does not awaken to save humanity. He awakens to measure it, to comprehend it fully, and to decide, with a patience beyond comprehension, whether it is worthy of continued existence, or whether it must be remade from the ashes of its failures. I collapsed to my knees, not in prayer, but in absolute terror, as the psychic pressure wrapped around me, coaxing confessions I did not even know I harbored. And I knew that by surviving this first wave of his awakening, I had glimpsed the infinite reach of a mind unbound, the simultaneous potential for mercy and annihilation, and the incomprehensible loneliness of a being forced to watch its creation stumble for 10,000 years. And as I looked up, sweat stinging my eyes, I saw the Emperor stir slightly within the throne, his form glowing with a light that burned and healed, judged and forgave, and I realized that the galaxy had begun its reckoning, that every soul, every empire, every secret act of devotion or betrayal would be counted, measured and held to an impossible standard, and I shivered knowing that none of us, neither high lords nor Astartes nor humble scribes like myself, would ever again live under the comforting illusion that the Emperor sleeps. By the time the fourth solar cycle passed in the perception of the imperial chronometers, it was no longer merely the throne chamber that trembled with the Emperor's stirrings. The very fabric of the Imperium itself seemed to pulse with a presence both terrible and incomprehensible, as if every system, every mind, every planet were suddenly bound together by the gravitational pull of a god who had begun to awaken and remember in full. Astropaths everywhere screamed as psychic currents reversed and twisted warp storms bloomed in the uncharted void, and even the most disciplined Astartes reported visions of futures they did not understand, a mixture of glory, betrayal, and annihilation laid bare in their minds, as if the Emperor were touching the galaxy, not just with awareness but with judgment. On Terra, the Imperial Palace became a nexus of impossible phenomena. Servitors collapsed mid-task, plasma conduits erupted in sparks that twisted into shapes that resembled faces of dead Primarchs, long-forgotten heroes and traitors, and I could see the red-robed tech priests muttering prayers that fell on ears already deaf to mercy. Even the custodes who had never faltered in 10,000 years of service stood in frozen awe, their normally perfect discipline cracking under the psychic onslaught. I walked the echoing corridors, trying to cling to reason, yet the very air seemed thickened with prescience, and I realized that the Emperor's consciousness had begun to probe beyond the throne, stretching through the Imperium like a tide, touching minds, souls, and machines with a reach no mortal or even immortal was prepared for. And in that moment, I understood why humanity has always been simultaneously his creation and his curse. For the Emperor is a mirror to our collective sins, and now that he stirs, the reflection is impossible to endure. Far above, the great dome glimmered with golden fire, and I felt the first of the casualties, a planetary governor, on a backwater world of little import, spontaneously combusted at the psychic touch, his memories spilling into the warp, screaming accusations at the Emperor he could barely comprehend, and his death resonated across the Astronomicon as though marking a tally in an impossible ledger of sin. Fleet commanders halted in mid-orbit, their strategies dissolving as they suddenly perceived their failures, betrayals, and lapses in loyalty. Worlds under siege experienced unnatural calm and terror simultaneously, as if the psychic touch of the throne froze time itself, forcing a reckoning of every action ever taken in the Emperor's name. Servitors feeding the throne convulsed violently, their mechanical hearts sparking their organic tissues screaming because the Emperor's awareness, though not yet fully expressed, was rewriting the interface between flesh and machine, bending the instruments of his imprisonment toward a logic that even the Mechanicus could not comprehend. I witnessed the first true psychic death when a young astropath, overwhelmed by the radiant magnitude of the Emperor's mind, imploded in the middle of his transmission, and the resulting warp feedback burned nearby minds, leaving red-hot impressions in the skulls of tech priests and acolytes who had witnessed it, a silent warning that proximity to the awakened Emperor is to touch a force beyond comprehension or mercy. I fled through the observation galleries, every step punctuated by the quiet hum of the throne, which now sounded almost alive, like the heartbeat of the galaxy itself, every pulse a rhythm of terror and awe. Corridors shifted imperceptibly, as if the palace was bending to accommodate a presence it had never before seen. And I saw fleeting glimpses of golden light splitting reality, flickering across the chamber walls like fractured memories of Terran history, the ascension of the Primarchs, the betrayals of Horus, the blood of worlds sacrificed, and the endless grinding march of humanity's sins laid bare. Somewhere deep in the bowels of the palace, the servo-chaplains reported whispered voices in the machinery chanting in tongues that no human had spoken in millennia, and when I approached to listen, I felt the hairs on my arms curl as though the Emperor's mind itself had touched mine, reading, testing, judging, and I realized that he does not merely watch. He probes, he reaches, and he understands the hidden cracks in loyalty, devotion, and fear, as though he is sculpting reality with the light of his consciousness. The first worlds to respond experienced uncanny phenomena. Crop yields withered overnight, storms tore through cities with surgical precision, and entire hive sectors stopped functioning as if some invisible hand had pressed pause on infrastructure and society alike. And I could hear whispers through the imperial cumnet of voices claiming visions of the throne glowing on the horizon, of the sky of angels descending in golden light that burned with judgment, and though I knew these were hallucinations, they were not false. For the Emperor's psychic reach now bends perception itself. My mind teetered on the edge of collapse as I observed the custodes escort a warband of survivors from one of the palace's laboratories. The survivors, faces blank, their minds hollowed by an awareness they could not bear, and I understood with horror that this was only the beginning. The Emperor does not awaken slowly to save or guide, he awakens to comprehend fully, and comprehension carries a price. I fell to my knees before the throne, body trembling, as the air shimmered with a heat and light that should not exist in this material plane. And I understood that the galaxy is now a stage for a mind that has waited 10,000 years, and nothing will ever be the same. The Imperium itself is under judgment, every soul accounted for, and the Emperor, having begun to act in ways subtle and catastrophic, will leave no failure unrecognized, no sin unmeasured, no betrayal unnoticed. And I realized with a sickening certainty that the first sparks of mercy might arrive in the same instant as the first fires of annihilation. I looked upon the throne, now glowing with psychic flames that licked the chamber walls, and I felt the pressure of time itself fold against me. For in the Emperor's awareness, past, present, and potential futures collide in an eternal crucible of divine cognition. And the thought alone made me weep. The one who created humanity may now decide whether it is worthy to endure, and I, a witness trapped in the cathedral of judgment, understood that to live in his presence is to face absolute truth, unsheltered, unrelenting, and infinitely terrifying. The first direct impression of his will was subtle, almost imperceptible. A whisper in the mind, not spoken yet, undeniable, a psychic tremor threading itself through my consciousness, like a needle of fire, and I felt the weight of 10,000 years of vigilance press into me as though my soul were an instrument tuned for his perception alone. It began with small things, the hesitation of a commissar deciding whether to execute a mutinous regiment, the sudden clarity in a navigator's mind that turned a desperate warp jump into a deathless nightmare. The inexplicable fear in a tech priest as machinery twisted to match a logic only the throne could comprehend. I understood with a horror that burned deeper than any blade, that the Emperor was now reaching beyond observation, touching choice itself, shaping the Imperium with a mind older than stars and infinitely patient, yet capable of wrath so absolute it makes the galaxy quake. I walked among the throng of red-robed tech priests custodies lining the corridors like statues of judgment, and felt the psychic tendrils brush my mind, touching my memories, my fears, my hidden failures, and I shivered because to exist in the throngs presence was to be read fully, utterly, without hope of concealment. There is no shield against him, no prayer that can hide truth from a mind that has seen all. Across terror signals of confusion cascaded, astropathic transmissions became frenzied navigators lost in sudden comprehension of futures they were never meant to perceive, and entire planetary bureaucracies stalled as governors felt the unnameable gaze of something greater, a god no longer asleep yet restrained only by his own design, and I could feel the weight of billions of lives pressing against my chest as if the galaxy itself were a single body gasping for understanding. On the palace level where the throne loomed, I saw a young Astartes from the Ultramarines stand frozen mid-step, eyes glazed as the Emperor's mind brushed against him, and I understood that even the genetically engineered minds of angels of death were fragile when confronted with absolute awareness. I could feel the echoes of his fear, the silent questions burning in him, the sudden recognition that the Imperium he served, fought and bled for was now being weighed by the fun one who created it, and the burden crushed him silently. The custodies intervened, their golden forms moving with precision honed over centuries, but even they hesitated because the Emperor's will is not something that can be fought or commanded, it is to be endured, and even endurance is tested to the edge of comprehension. The palace itself shifted under the influence of his awakening, corridors bending imperceptibly, light warping around the throne, mechanized supports creaking as if in acknowledgement of a force beyond any physical constraint, while the red-robed tech priests whispered frantic calculations and prayers that bounced into the golden psychic field and returned as judgments they could neither read nor comprehend. One by one they collapsed, their minds fried by the sheer scale of his awareness, leaving the custodies to drag the twitching bodies from the chamber like children abandoned to a storm. And then came the first act of mercy, or perhaps judgment, masquerading as mercy. A psyche on the lower levels, moments from being sacrificed to fuel the throne, suddenly found clarity, a vision of purpose imbued directly by the Emperor's mind, and I saw the horror and awe on her face as she realized that the god of mankind had touched her soul, guiding and scouring at once, a duality no mortal could reconcile, a gift and a curse in one radiant, unbearable moment. Reports filtered in from across the system, entire hive cities ceased in their normal chaos, citizens caught in inexplicable rapture or terror. Machinery stopped mid-operation, fleets frozen in orbit, and I realized with a stomach-churning certainty that the Emperor's awareness was now not just local, not just psychic, but systemic, touching the heart of the Imperium in ways no human hand could measure or resist. Worlds that had never known his light now trembled under the weight of his attention, and some, I knew, would never survive the touch. In the sanctum, the golden throne glowed like molten sunfire, veins of psychic energy pulsating outward, spilling into the palace, into terror, into the void, and I felt the first whispers of futures collapsing and reforming under his cognition. Rebellions that had simmered for centuries faltered. Chaos cults felt the piercing gaze of a mind that has no tolerance for deception. And armies poised for war hesitated, struck dumb with the realization that the hand that guides their fates is now awake and aware, and will judge with all the precision of a mind forged in divinity and crucible. I turned my gaze to the Emperor himself, glimpsed through the golden machinery, and in the faint shift of his posture, the subtle flare of his psychic aura, I saw the impossible. Comprehension, not just of the past or present, but of every hidden fault, every betrayal, every act of courage and cowardice, every secret hope and failure, all collated and weighed in a mind, beyond life and death, beyond time, beyond mercy as mortals conceive it. And I trembled, not in prayer, not in awe alone, but in the deep visceral fear that to live under the gaze of such a being is to be held accountable for the infinitesimal and the monumental alike. And as I fell to my knees, chest heaving, I understood the truth whispered only in the dark corners of the Adeptus Terra. The Emperor of mankind, though bound to the throne, is now no longer merely a presence to be worshipped, no longer a god asleep, but a mind awake, judging, guiding, punishing, and blessing all at once, and humanity, fragile and countless, teeters on the edge of awe and annihilation, with no recourse, no hiding, no hope of shelter, for the galaxy itself has become his mirror, and everything reflected will either endure or burn. The final stirrings of the Golden Throne were no longer subtle. The air itself trembled with a force that was at once ancient, infinite, and unbearably intimate, as though the Emperor's mind had stretched beyond his physical confines to touch the heart of every star, every fleet, every soul that called itself human, and I felt it in my bones, a pressure that was neither weight nor sound, yet more real than the air I breathed, and more terrifying than the screams of 10,000 psychers fed to the throne over millennia.